I live in a pretty nice, safe area. The kind of place where the biggest emergencies are almost always medical, not criminal. In the 6 years I've lived here, I've built a solid routine for my mental and physical health, which includes going on evening walks. I know the area well, and the people too. Sometimes I see a few homeless individuals around, but they've always been respectful. I give them a polite nod. They go their way, I go mine. No issues. It's a peaceful routine I've come to value. That peace was shattered last night. It started when I was walking near a residential park, a large open space surrounded by neat rows of newer homes. I noticed a man standing across the street at the crosswalk. What stood out to me immediately was how he wasn't crossing, even though the road was completely clear of traffic. Instead, he was standing there, still, almost unnervingly still, watching me. Eventually, he crossed the street, and instead of heading off in his own direction or passing me, he began walking behind me. Not casually, not naturally, pacing me. I'm 5'0", so someone his size, at least a foot taller, lanky but moving with sharp, jerky motions. Should have easily outpaced me if he was just going somewhere. But he didn't. He stayed behind, his pace matching mine too precisely. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to be subtle. There was no limp, no obvious disability that would cause him to move slower. He wasn't struggling physically. His movements were odd, almost twitchy, but not slow. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Trying to stay calm, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just going to catch a bus. A bus stop bench was up ahead, so I decided to sit there, a little test to see if he'd keep walking or sit too. Instead, he stooped down in front of me, right there at the bench, pretending to tie his boots. That's when I got a good look at him. Disheveled clothing, matted hair, vacant, glassy eyes. He mumbled something I couldn't understand, nonsensical and slurred, before sitting down right next to me. My instincts were screaming now. I muted my music but kept my headphones in, pretending to be deep into my phone. I watched him from the corner of my eye as he shifted oddly, turning away slightly, then turning back. His whole body coiled like he wasn't sure what he was going to do next. I didn't wait to find out. I stood up and briskly walked the way I had come, heading toward more familiar, better-lit areas. I tried to stay calm, keep my pace even, but when I glanced back, there he was, following me again. This time I didn't hold back. I turned around, screamed at him to leave me alone, my voice carrying across the empty street. He just laughed, a high, unnerving laugh like he found it funny. I didn't look back again until I reached an intersection I knew well, brightly lit and close to homes where I could call for help if needed. Once I was safe enough, I called my husband, voice shaking. He immediately jumped in his car and started circling the neighborhood to look for the guy and make sure he wasn't lurking nearby. After calming down a little, I called the non-emergency police line to report what happened. They took it seriously. Within the hour, an officer called me back. They had already picked him up. Turns out my instincts were dead on. The man had been on a rampage that evening, starting with a violent domestic incident where he assaulted a disabled person he lived with. He destroyed and stole their phone and even tampered with utilities, smashing lights, cutting wires, to keep the victim from getting help. After that, he wandered into the neighborhood, banging on doors, causing disturbances. The officer who spoke to me explained that the man was severely mentally unwell and off his medications, which lined up with the mumbling, the erratic movements, and his chaotic behavior. Even though I was relieved he was in custody, the whole experience left me exhausted, emotionally wrung out. This wasn't my first experience with harassment, unfortunately. When I was a teenager, I was followed twice, scared out of my mind both times, too young to know what to do beyond run and hide. As an adult, while just trying to do my job, a customer decided my polite professionalism was flirting and obsessed over me, to the point of harassing my coworkers to find out my schedule. He kept showing up day after day until I finally had to involve management. Another time, a meth-addicted man sexually harassed me just for not smiling at him in public. He screamed at me like I had committed a crime. And another time, some random guy pulled up next to me in a car, opened his door, and demanded to know if I had a boyfriend. When I told him off, he acted like I had wronged him. And it's not like I'm some supermodel or anything. I'm just trying to exist, go for a walk, pick up some groceries, get through a work shift without being treated like public property. I'm tired. Tired of always having to watch my back. Tired of feeling like being out in public automatically makes me a target. I don't want to have to be hyper vigilant just to enjoy a simple evening stroll. I just want to be left the hell alone. It was a humid night in late July, 2023. The kind of night where the air feels thick and heavy, almost alive. I remember it clearly because something happened to me that I still can't explain. That night I climbed into bed feeling restless. There was nothing particularly unusual about the day. No scary movies, no ghost stories, nothing to stir up my imagination. But as I laid there trying to find a cool spot on my pillow, I felt it, the strangest sensation, like invisible hands gripping my ankles. Before I could react, I was being dragged, slowly but deliberately toward the foot of the bed. Panicking, I snapped my eyes open. The room was dark, save for the faint glow from a streetlight outside. Nothing. No one was there. But when I sat up, dazed and confused, I realized I wasn't on my bed anymore. I was on the cold, hard floor. I scrambled up, heart racing, and convinced myself it must have been a vivid dream, or maybe even sleepwalking, though I'd never had a history of that. Trying to brush it off, I climbed back into bed, wrapped the blanket tightly around me, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next night it happened again, only this time it was worse. I had just started dozing off when that same sensation returned, like hands pulling me downward. My body felt paralyzed, heavy like lead, as I was dragged inch by inch toward the edge. I fought to move, to scream, but it was like something was holding me in place. When I forced my eyes open, the first thing I noticed was my closet door. It was wide open. I never leave it open at night. I always make sure it's closed because, honestly, even as an adult, there's something unsettling about a dark, open closet while you're trying to sleep. I sat up, breathless, and looked around in a panic. My blanket was missing. I turned toward the closet, and there it was, crumpled in a heap inside, like something had dragged it in there. My stomach dropped. The air in the room was icy despite the summer heat. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to leave the room, but my legs felt like jelly. Every instinct in me screamed that I wasn't alone, that something unseen was watching me from the shadows. From that night on, everything changed. At first, it was small things. Lights flickering even though the bulbs were new. My phone randomly glitching out when I entered the room. The faint sound of whispering when I was just about to fall asleep. Then objects would be in different places when I woke up. My keys, my shoes, even picture frames on my wall would tilt without explanation. I tried telling a few friends, but they just laughed it off, saying I was probably dreaming or stressed. But deep down, I knew better. There was something off in that room now. One night, about a week after the closet incident, I decided to set up my phone to record overnight. I propped it up on my desk, aimed at the bed and closet, and hit record. I figured maybe if I caught something on video, I'd either prove to myself it was nothing or, if I was right, finally have evidence. The next morning, heart pounding, I checked the footage. At first, there was nothing, just me sleeping, tossing and turning a little. Hours passed in the footage with nothing unusual until around 3:07 a.m. The blanket on my bed shifted, not a small movement, but as if something tugged at it from the foot of the bed. Then, clear as day, the closet door, which had been closed, slowly creaked open by itself. There was no one in sight, no wind, no logical reason. The blanket slid off the bed toward the open closet, as if pulled by invisible hands. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there frozen. There was no explaining this away, no logical excuse. No dream, no imagination. Something was in that room with me. After seeing the video, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my room that night. I crashed on the living room couch with all the lights on, telling myself it was just for one night, just until I figured out what to do. But even there, under the bright glow of the lamps, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond my sight. The house itself felt different now, heavier, almost like the air had thickened with something invisible and malevolent. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the windows made my heart race. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, certain I would catch a glimpse of something, someone standing there. The next evening I decided to confront it. It sounds stupid now, but at the time I was desperate. I marched into my bedroom just before midnight and stood in front of the closet door. I left it open on purpose this time, daring whatever it was to show itself. I said out loud, "If someone's here, show yourself." The words barely left my mouth when a cold, sharp breeze cut across the room. My skin erupted in goosebumps. The closet door, which had been hanging open loosely, slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself. My breathing turned ragged. It was no dream, no trick of the mind. Something had heard me. I bolted out of the room and spent the night at a friend's place, too scared to even go back for my toothbrush. When I finally returned the next afternoon, the house was eerily silent. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was over. Maybe it just wanted to scare me off for a night, but I was wrong. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. I would find long, thin scratches on the walls, too high for me to have accidentally made. I started hearing tapping on my bedroom window at night, soft at first, then harder, almost urgent, even though my room was on the second floor. Worst of all were the dreams. Every night, without fail, I would dream of standing at the edge of my own bed, looking down at myself as I slept. In the dreams, there was always a figure standing next to me, a tall, shadowy silhouette that leaned closer and closer until I woke up gasping for air. It didn't feel like a dream anymore. It felt like something was pulling me out of my body, something that wanted me to leave it behind. By the end of that month, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, left the house, and stayed with family across town. The first night away, I slept like a rock. No dreams, no pulling, no cold air, no scratches, nothing. It was only then that I realized whatever was in that house wasn't just haunting the building. It had been after me. And the scariest part, even now, sometimes when I'm just about to fall asleep in a new safe place, I swear I can still feel the tug, that slow, deliberate pull at my ankles, reminding me that whatever it was, it never really left. For a while it was quiet, peaceful even. I convinced myself that whatever had latched onto me had lost its grip the moment I walked out of that house. Maybe it was tied to that place somehow. The room, the closet. Maybe by leaving I had left it behind. But the thing about false peace is that it lulls you into a sense of safety right before it rips everything away again. It started again about a month later. I was living with my cousin by then, crashing in his spare bedroom. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding for no reason. The room was dark except for the dim blue glow of my phone charging on the nightstand. I sat up, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I swung my legs off the side of the bed, planting my feet on the carpet, and froze. There was something wet. I pulled my feet back, and in the pale light, I saw it. Two long, damp trails on the carpet, stretching from the foot of the bed all the way to the doorway. Like something had crawled in, dragging itself across the floor to reach me. I stared at the door. It was cracked open, just slightly. But I hadn't left it like that. I was sure of it. The next day I tried to tell my cousin. He's a rational guy. the type who believes there's an explanation for everything. He said maybe it was a leaking pipe, or maybe I spilled something without realizing it. But there was no leak, no spilled water, and deep down, I knew it wasn't something normal. A few nights later, it got worse. I woke again, same time, 2 a.m., to the feeling of hands on my ankles. This time, there was no slow dragging. It was a yank, hard enough that I almost fell out of bed. I scrambled to turn on the light, and for a split second, just before the bulb flickered to life, I saw it. A figure, pitch black, darker than the room around it, crouching at the end of the bed, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, like it was studying me. When the light finally buzzed on, it was gone. I barely slept after that. I started keeping lights on all night, locking the bedroom door, even though deep down I knew a door wouldn't stop it. But the worst moment, the one that still makes my blood run cold, came a few days later. I woke up not in my bed, but on the floor. I was lying directly in front of the closet. Only this time the closet door was wide open, and inside I saw what looked like the outline of a person just standing there, motionless. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just watched. I blinked and it was gone. But that was enough. The next morning, without even packing properly, I left. I didn't even tell my cousin where I was going. I just drove, miles and miles, until the house, the town, even the memory of that room felt far behind me. But here's the thing about something truly evil. You can't run from it. Not really. Even now, sometimes, I'll wake up and find my blankets. Sometimes I'll wake up and find my blankets twisted into knots at the foot of the bed. I'll hear the faint scrape of something dragging across the floor when no one else is home. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I swear I can feel it again. That slow, patient pull, waiting for me to fall asleep. This memory clawed its way back to me today after I woke up from a nightmare, and it's been on my mind ever since. I figured I should finally share it. Maybe someone can help me understand what exactly happened, because all these years later, I still can't explain it. When this happened, I was about 13 years old. The girl who was with me, Mira, was around 10. She was the niece of my tutor, Miss Lila, who had been teaching me and my brother since we were tiny. Actually, she even taught my brother Evan before I was born. Our family lived in an 8-story apartment building that my grandmother Amar had built on our ancestral land. Before the apartment, there had been a much older 2-story structure on the property, one wrapped in old rumors. I'd always heard whispers from the adults. Construction workers who stayed there talked of hearing heavy footsteps upstairs when the building was completely empty, or catching sight of a figure moving around unfinished sections. At the time, though, I didn't know these things. I only learned about them years later when I was old enough to be told the truth. Our family occupied 3 floors: the ground floor, the mezzanine, and the first floor. The ground and mezzanine were open to each other, connected by indoor stairs, with the mezzanine acting like an interior balcony overlooking the ground floor. My grandparents' bedroom was there, and across from it stood a shrine, a beautiful but eerie Buddhist altar, its presence thick and solemn. A staircase near the shrine led up to the first floor, where my immediate family lived. Toys spilled from the shelves, tucked into the stairwell, a patchwork of my childhood innocence that somehow never quite softened the eerie feel of the place. The encounter. That day, the house was silent. My mom was out grocery shopping, my dad was at work, and Evan was off at his tutor's house across the street. It wasn't unusual. Miss Lila lived just a few houses down, and our relatives lived right next door. Miss Lila had actually offered to watch over Mira and me at her place, but we had insisted on staying home. She finally relented, dropping us off with strict instructions and a quick word to my aunt next door to check in on us. Mira and I were playing hide and seek among the stairwells and empty rooms, our laughter echoing a little too sharply through the empty house. We were just about to start a new game when I heard it. A voice. Clear, unmistakable. My name. It came from upstairs, from Evan's room. His door was at the very top of the stairs, half open, with darkness pooling inside. It sounded exactly like Evan. Same tone, same casual way he always called me. I froze. Mira froze too, wide-eyed. Did you hear that? She whispered. Yeah, dot, dot, dot. I breathed out. It must be Evan. But he's at his tutoring class, Mira reminded me, voice trembling slightly. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he came home early, I said, even though I knew that didn't make sense. The other stairwell he would have used had a heavy steel door that shrieked when it opened. We would have heard it. Still, we convinced ourselves to check. Hand in hand, we crept upstairs, every step creaking loudly in the heavy, unnatural silence. When we reached Evan's door, I remember this pressure, like the air was heavier, thicker, like stepping into a place you weren't supposed to be. I reached out and pushed the door open wider. The room was empty. No Evan, no one. The windows were locked. The closet door was open and empty. There was nowhere anyone could hide. The air in the room was freezing cold, far colder than the rest of the house, even with the air conditioning Miss Lila had left running. Mira tugged at my arm urgently. We need to go, she whispered, and then, just as we turned to run, we heard the door slam behind us, hard enough to rattle the walls. There was no one there. We bolted. I don't even remember racing down the stairs, just the blur of fear and the sickening feeling that something was chasing right behind us. We didn't even bother turning off the air conditioning. We just fled the apartment entirely, bursting into the bright, too-hot sunlight outside like drowning kids finally finding air. We spent the rest of the afternoon sitting silently at my aunt's house, not daring to tell the adults, not daring to go back inside. It wasn't until years later, when I was older, that my grandmother and other relatives started casually mentioning all the strange things that had happened in that building long before I was born. The sightings, the footsteps, the voices. I don't know what called my name that day. I only know it wasn't my brother. And sometimes when I wake up from nightmares even now, I swear I can still hear that voice, calling me from a dark, empty room upstairs. It was almost 15 years ago, during one of those long, blistering Texas summers, when the night still held the heavy heat of the day. My best friend, let's call her Emily, and I were restless, searching for anything to break the boredom of our school vacation. I lived in New Braunfels, Texas back then, a town big enough to have its own personality, but small enough that you could still get from one end to the other without much trouble. Days blurred together in that heavy summer heat. By the time night rolled around, the roads emptied out, stores pulled down their shutters, and the world felt abandoned. My best friend, I'll call her Emily, and I were restless that night. You know the kind of restless that feels like it's itching under your skin? That was us. The hours dragged on, and the idea of just sitting at home, scrolling through the same old stuff, or trying to force sleep felt unbearable. So we decided to do what bored teenagers do best, wander. We chose the local park, a sprawling place tucked into the edge of town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a playground, a baseball field, and a picnic area surrounded by thick clusters of trees. During the day, it was filled with families and kids shrieking with laughter. But after midnight, it transformed. The familiar became strange. Safe corners melted into shadows, and every sound carried a little farther than it should have. Still, we weren't scared. Not then. The night was thick and humid, the kind that made your clothes stick to your skin and your hair cling to the back of your neck. We kicked at loose rocks, swung half-heartedly on the empty swings, and talked about everything and nothing. Time didn't seem to matter. It must have been close to 1 a.m. when we saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a silhouette against the dim orange glow of the far-off streetlights. Perched on top of one of the old worn picnic tables. We both paused, halfway through a story about some teacher we couldn't stand. Emily saw it the same second I did. It wasn't normal. Who just sits in a park at 1 a.m., crouched on top of a table instead of sitting like a person? We stared, trying to figure out what we were looking at. Maybe it was some drunk guy or a weird loner, we reasoned. Maybe someone high acting strange. Logic tried to wrestle with the growing discomfort gnawing at our insides. But the longer we looked, the less sense it made. The figure didn't move like a drunk person. It was too still, too deliberate. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop straight through the soles of my shoes. Wings, not folded neatly like a bird's. These wings were ragged, dark, almost blending into the night. They shifted slightly, catching the faintest bit of light as they twitched, just enough to confirm that I wasn't imagining them. I whispered, barely breathing, "Emily, do you see?" "I see it," she hissed back, clutching my arm so tightly her fingernails dug into my skin. That's when the thing turned its head. Even from where we stood, I could feel its gaze, not just looking at us, looking through us, like it could see every fear tucked away in our hearts. And then it screamed. I'll never be able to describe that sound perfectly. Words aren't built for it. Imagine the shriek of a woman in mortal terror, layered with something inhuman underneath. A note too deep, too guttural, vibrating through the ground and into your bones. It was like a death rattle and a war cry tangled into one horrifying sound. The air vibrated around us. My knees buckled for half a second before instinct screamed louder than my fear. Run. We bolted. The park blurred around us. Trees, benches, the empty swings, all turned into dark smudges as we sprinted harder than either of us ever had in our lives. My lungs burned within moments, but adrenaline pushed me past the point of pain. Every few seconds, I risked a glance over my shoulder, certain I would see that towering figure with wings bearing down on us. But the night stayed empty, silent except for our ragged gasps. We tore through the streets, pounding on doors, desperate for shelter. Porch lights flicked on, and shadowy figures appeared behind curtains. But nobody opened their doors. Instead, we were met with warnings yelled through the wood. Threats about guns, about calling the police. In a town like ours, strangers at your door past midnight were a danger, not a call for help. We were on our own. I kept looking to the sky. I couldn't help it. Part of me was convinced that any second now, those wings would blot out the stars and it would swoop down to snatch us off the ground like hawks hunting mice. Minutes dragged like hours until we saw flashing lights, a police cruiser creeping down the street. Relief flooded me so fast I nearly collapsed. Two officers stepped out. One, a tall white man with a bored expression. The other, a stockier Mexican man whose face seemed harder to read.